Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Talking Landscape Photography for tonight. It's pretty awesome to have you with us. It's nice to be back live. It's been a while. And it's nice to also be joined by the illustrious Paul Hoelen, who's our presenter for tonight. So nice for him to take a different role as to the usual. And then also Ben Mays. How you going, Ben?
Hey, good, thanks. Good, thanks. Yeah, good to be here. Very, very much looking forward to this. I think most of us have been hanging on the edge of our seats waiting for Paul to put together some of the photos trip up north. So yeah, really keen to see what Paul has to show us tonight.
Yeah, same here. I've heard it. I've been speaking with Toby, who ran the trip that Paul went on, and yes, he mentioned that there's some pretty amazing things that happened and some shots that were taken. So it's going to be pretty exciting to see what Mr. Paul's been up to, and it must be hard to sit on so much work, so I'm sure we'll hear all about that. You've been out busy doing much shooting, Ben?
Not landscape in particular. Lots of shooting with the weddings and the property stuff. So some nice bookings lately, but yeah, nothing of interest to people tuning into the show here. But yeah, really just gearing up for a pretty intense 6 months for landscape photography. So yeah, as I've mentioned in previous shows, got New Zealand in a month's time or just under now. And yeah, trying to get fit for that, getting my hip all fixed up for that again. And then yeah, Tassie with Paul down in November, which we're very excited about. That workshop's officially going ahead, which we're really keen for. We've had a few more people book in lately, so for anyone who is interested, we've got one more place for that left, one more single supplement room. So if you're inspired to join us in the Tscharke and get some beautiful rainforest scenes, then there's one place left for that. Or if you're a couple, it could be a couple booking as well. So yeah, really excited for that, and my private workshop down there as well.
November 17th to 21st, that one, and all the details on Ben's awesome website.
So no, it should be a good time. We're both super keen. And then Dolomites, as mentioned, in February. Ordered my sleeping bag for that recently. A bit of a big spend, but the -20s rated down sleeping bags, always a hefty purchase, but should last me well. It's better to have a depleted bank account than frostbite. So
that's right. I don't want to be a popsicle out there. So it's nice to make it back and actually be able to do something with the pictures. So I think it's a pretty money well spent in that regard.
Really at this point, just getting very excited for upcoming trips. And there'll be a point in time where I actually have something to show for it. So I know I've been all talk for a little while now. So I promise I'll have new photos to show at some point, everyone.
Very good, very good. And Paul and I have been quite busy out running some workshops, and basically I spent about 10 days taking the Camberwell Camera Club around Tasmania, which was absolutely amazing, and got some very special conditions and managed to finish it all off on the very last night with some aurora, which was we were sort of crossing our fingers for the whole time. So it was really nice to sort of have an amazing final dinner that Paul's friends cooked, and then head out for some aurora shooting as well at Cape Bruni Lighthouse. So you can't really complain about that. And then a couple of days later, I started my first.
We seem to be making a habit of that, Lukey. How many workshops is that we've finished on an epic aurora on the last?
I know. Well, that was pretty much the last workshop I think we ran together. The same thing happened. So I actually have just come back from running a workshop after that workshop. I did my first Aurora Nightscape Chase workshop, and we managed to get Aurora both nights on that workshop. And I think the Aurora's red alert at the moment. So it's definitely heating up down here in terms of the solar activity and auroras. And I've actually got a couple more workshops chasing the aurora and the night sky in October. So if you're keen to come down to Tassie and jump in the car with me and try and catch the southern lights, or at least some nice clear night skies, and definitely get in touch. If you're subscribed to the mailing list, you'll see some links there to some of the things that I've got going. And also tomorrow night I've got a talk I'm extremely excited about, which is about composition, and talking about how I view composition strategies and approaches that I've had to create images that I feel have a lot of impact and have done well in photography competitions, and sort of dissect some of those images and just talk about some ways to think about your image making, especially out in the field. It's something you not talked about or taught too often, I think, and I'd like to think I'm going to bring my own flair to that, and maybe you'll pick up a sort of some new tips or so from that. So check that out. It's on tomorrow night.
Why don't you check that out, Loki? Get some tips off you, bro.
Well, why not? Why not? It's more the merrier. Just pay up, Paul, and you're all.
Oh,
you're
good. Pay. All right, pay the way. Pay to play.
It's all this is all stuff, Paul, that I've learnt over many years, and I've already taught you so much. I just don't know how much I can keep up with it all. So anyway, but
a little bit on my side. I've been waiting quite a few years to have Matt Payne ask me to come on the F-Stop Collaborate and Listen, and we finally managed to cross paths just before he headed away on his epic sort of 35-day solo, and he just released the podcast yesterday, actually. And if you're kind of used to me in a landscape realm, this podcast is very much about all the aspects of my life that have absolutely little or nothing to do with that. And it's kind of a podcast that's very deeply infused with how to imbue meaning and purpose in your life, or your passion, or your presence as an image maker. So it's quite an inspirational sort of base one. And if you're not so familiar with all the other sort of different bodies of work that I do over my career, you might find that really quite interesting. And Matt and I have a lot in common. We have a lot of background and therapeutic sort of work as well. And that's actually where a lot of my photography actually began, funny enough. So it's a little bit left field, but it's really deep and personal and quite a wonderful podcast, actually. Really proud of it. So, and it was nice to exchange. I know Lucky's been on there before. I think, Ben, you might have too already, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, I've a couple of years ago now, actually. I think it was on the podcast.
You're like 21 years old and you're getting on. I gotta wait till I'm almost 50. What's going on?
No, I haven't been on that one, so I'm still waiting for an invite.
Nah, that's all right. I had a bit of a foot in with Matt because I've kind of stepped back from the Discord stuff now, so I know concentrate on more stuff. But when I was quite active in the Discord, me and Matt would chat a bit, and so we kind of got into a few spirited debates in there, and I think that was kind of what put me on his radar a little more. I think I'm a little bit more involved in the American sort of side of interacting with that sort of landscape photography community than you guys are at times. So because that was sort of the realm I got brought up in. But yeah, so no, I had a good chat with him, although there's probably some updates to things I said on there that, it was maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago now. I think pandemic times when I was on there. It was a good chat though.
Perspectives.
I think we were still talking about NFTs was still a hot topic at that point. And I was like, I didn't need part of an, if I was to be on a podcast today, I wouldn't dedicate space to chatting about that, but that's all good. You talk about what's interesting at the time. That was interesting at the time.
Everything has its time and its place, and I'm really looking forward to seeing Paul's chat, because I'm sure he would have talked Matt's ear off as well, but at the same time would be very deep and meaningful as well. So so definitely check that one out.
Definitely a deep one. And speaking of Americans, I won't drop the name, but we are lining up one of the pretty much American royalty in terms of nature and landscape photography. Someone who's had a career for 40 or 50 years and literally used to shoot and work with Ansel Adams is coming on our show soon. We're just lining up an interview with him on Friday, so that likely to end up to be our next show. So I'm very excited about that. That's I feel like I've got to up my game here with someone that's been interviewed probably for 40 years. Like, what kind of questions and things can you ask that he hasn't heard a million times already? But at the same time, fresh audience down under, and stay tuned for that. But fellas, I might get started. I've got a lot to cover, and and knowing me, that's going to be hard to pack it all in. So I can introduce myself, or you can introduce it, however you like.
Well, tonight we're joined by Paul Hoelen. He's a photographer based in Hobart, Tasmania, and lives in the foothills of Conunny, Mount Wellington. And he's been shooting in Tasmania for 25 years. And he's had some recent forays outside of Tasmania up into the North Pole area, which would include Svalbard. And that's the topic for tonight's show. Paul, take it away.
Oh, mate, I just feel like you signed up for a radio job there. It's like this Tscharke extraordinaire. You're looking the part with the with the earphones.
With a headset, yeah. No, it's just my comfort zone when I've got my headphones on, so it's all good.
Yeah, I tried those out a few days ago. Remember, epic headphones, mate.
It's hard to take them off.
So Svalbard is, yeah, it's. I've been quite a few places in my life, and it's not always that often that I manage to experience a place that just touches me in ways that I just didn't even see coming. And this place has moved me in ways that I'm still even trying to comprehend. And I think it was partly just how particularly unique and special this trip was and the conditions we had, and very, very much the place. I haven't been to the polar ends of the earth before, and I made it into a big trip, which included Iceland and the Arabian Desert and Norway and Amsterdam. And I will do another show, particularly on Iceland and the Arabian Desert, because that was equally incredible. There's no way I could pack it all together. So I thought I'd start with Svalbard and sort of give it the breathing room that it deserves. We did have a show quite a while ago with Toby Story, who we spoke a lot about him himself. He's a very dear friend of mine, one of my best friends, actually. And we did sort of introduce Svalbard to some extent, but this will be a lot deeper and a lot broader and a lot more visual. Because Toby wasn't necessarily there as a photographer. He was running sea kayaking trips and occasionally he'd get a bit of a snap. And really this trip came to life because of Toby. Toby is the CEO of a wonderful company called Southern Sea Ventures. And they run incredible multi-day expeditions all around the world, from Papua New Guinea to Greenland and Svalbard and Antarctica and Costa Rica and I think even Mexico, all sorts of places around the planet. And he very bravely took on as a CEO as the start of COVID, and in a way that you really didn't know how it's going to come out. So it's starting to pay off and it's starting to come to light. And Toby used to be my photography assistant a long time ago, and we've had a very long-standing relationship. And he's had in mind to come into some sort of partnership, a way we can work together on some of these journeys. And so this particular trip was in sort of late May to early mid-June this year. And the way it was set up is we created a customized trip on a special ship where we chartered the whole ship for ourselves. And I ran a photographic component and Toby ran a sea kayaking component. And they were both kind of options on a larger expedition, but larger being a more intimate boat. Like Toby has had a lot of experience running these sort of trips, and he is very, very clear that he prefers, and now I'm kind of with him actually, running them on a smaller, more intimate boat for a lot of good reasons, and I'll go into why.
And I don't know if I can just jump in there, Paul, but I'm also going to be running an Antarctic trip with Toby later this year. So, there's some crossover there as well. And so if you're looking to go on the similar vessel to Antarctica, then keep that in mind and get in touch as well.
Yeah, it's a special ship. So keep that in mind. I'm hoping going to get down there next year. Fingers crossed. It's kind of like, well, they're a long way. It's a long way to go. But I might give people a bit of a sense of where the heck Svalbard is, because we're sort of talking with a bit of assumptions here. So I'll start sharing my screen and we'll give it a bit of a sense of place. You guys see my screen okay?
Yep, all good.
Yep, working for me.
So I've chosen Google Earth, and pretty much, it's funny. Svalbard is a bit of a unique place in that it really wasn't discovered till very, very late in the piece. You've got Iceland, Greenland, Norway. Norway is the gateway into Svalbard for a number of reasons. But pretty much the Arctic, it's about 80 degrees north about here. So a lot of this is locked up in sea ice for huge amounts of the year. And I think it's one of the reasons it really wasn't discovered until 1596, when some of the early Dutch explorers were looking to find a way through the mysterious Northeast Passage, because Spain and Portugal had tied up a lot of the trade and some of the lower ways to get around the world, and they were looking for somewhere new. And it's, as you can see, like literally where you see snow, it's 60% covered in glaciers. It has a settlement here in the middle here called Longyearbyen, which is literally the northernmost settlement on planet Earth in terms of a permanent settlement. And what's quite special about this place is a number of things, is that it's so remote that it really wasn't discovered. It has no indigenous population, which you can hardly say about anywhere on Earth in that regard. And so partly due to that and the fact that, you know, 2/3 of it is covered in protected kind of reserves of some kind. It's one of the best places in the world to access, you know, polar animals and wildlife. It's only 12% vegetated. It's 60% covered in glaciers, and it's about 23%, I think, 27% actually just bare rock, basically. So it's an unusual place in that it really feels kind of barren of life, but not barren as in like lifeless, because it's a raw, powerful place, but barren in terms of it has a lot of space and it has a lot of silence and it has a lot of solace. To get there, you pretty much have to run through Norway. So for a long, long time, up until 1920, actually, it really wasn't under any single country's jurisdiction. It was a bit of a no man's land, and it was kind of run by, you know, it was pretty open to anyone. And there was a lot of cohesive use by a lot of different nations. The Russians in particular got up there pretty early, and they had these characters called the Pomars that really went up there and did incredible 150 years worth of Arctic hunting, very, very rich hunting grounds, particularly for the pelts and the things like Arctic foxes in particular have the warmest coat for anything in the world. There's a lot of species there. Svalbard reindeer is found nowhere else in the world, and I'll show you some images of that. We'll talk about why. But partly it did eventually in the 1920s sort of come under the jurisdiction of Norway. And there's a lot of other countries that have had a bit of a look in, the Russians in particular. And really, it wasn't until they started pushing mining that it became really significant to create a treaty and create sort of levels of ownership around it, because that's not something that everybody can sort of operate at the same time and functionally. So they managed to sign a treaty by a lot of different nations around the world. But it still has a level of independence. Like, you don't necessarily have to arrive with a passport. You know, they don't actually pay taxes to Norway, even though there is a level of legal jurisdiction that Norway covers over it. So it's still a bit of a unique place. It sits kind of on its own in the world as somewhere that has a certain character that not many places do. And the only way to get there by flying is through Norway, through Oslo or Tromsø, I think it is. And I went through Oslo this time. And I saw a stopover either through Tokyo or Abu Dhabi in my case, and I went eeny, meeny, miny, moe, and I chose Abu Dhabi and ended up making that a big adventure. But it's a long way from here, and you know, if I'm going to make a carbon footprint that big, I'm going to try and make the most of it and make it as worthwhile as possible. It is the fastest changing place in the world in terms of climate change. Some scientists even rate it as 6 times so. And so it's very, very apparent. And I think it'd be more so heading back next year on the trip of organizing with Toby, well, 2, hopefully, actually. You know, that literal change, you know, they had a huge amount of sea ice this year, which is a bit unusual. And it's strangely an unexpected aspect of the warming is sea ice can actually evolve and spread further in response to heat. But the problem is it becomes thinner. And the thinner ice then melts faster and starts a cycle where it slowly shrinks more and more, and it won't come back, and it comes thinner and thinner. And when it becomes thinner and thinner, it causes issues particularly for polar bears. And it is the penultimate place on the planet to see polar bears. And we went in the early season, and the early season means there's a lot of pack ice still and what they call fast ice. Fast ice is the ice that actually literally is connected to the land itself. And then the pack ice is more what drifts around. And you literally can't access it by boat for a lot of the year. It's just completely locked in. And it has 4 months of the year where it's completely dark, 24 hours a day, and 4 months of the year where it's completely light. So, and, you know, it pushes up to beyond 80 degrees north and the upper part of it. It was, the original name was Spitsbergen, which actually means pointed mountains. And that was actually named initially by the first Dutch explorers in the late 1500s. And the name they pulled it back to Svalbard, but they still call the main island that I spent most of my time exploring Spitsbergen, and for very good reason. Pretty much everywhere he goes, pointed mountains and glaciers and fjords, and there is quite a lot of tundra landscape. There's a bit of a change in what it looks like in different sort of places around the islandscape. It's not all consistent and all the same. And I think particularly on the eastern side. I'll just go back to sharing my screen. Particularly on the eastern side here, there's a lot of lower sort of areas, and you can see the mountainous areas here and all the way through. although the biggest mountain is actually up in here. I think it's 1,730 meters or thereabouts. Our trip, basically, at that time of year, you can't actually make it all the way around because the pack ice is too thick. And this area here is one of the longest sort of uninterrupted glacier fronts on Earth, actually. And I've seen pictures of it with like 19 waterfalls coming off it at the same time. Some of the biggest kind of seabird cliffs are up here in this kind of area of the island, which we couldn't quite get to as well. We pretty much started in the old Longyearbyen and we made it all the way up to here. We tried to get around as far as we could, pretty much to about here, maybe about here. Came back down and went all the way down into the south and all the way down into the southern fjord here. So the western side is incredibly spectacular country. It really, really is. I'm looking forward to going back another time of year though as well to get a sense of the breadth and diversity of the landscape all the way around. A lot of these places around here in particular, you're really not allowed to even set foot on. Some of them have specialist research stations and scientists that are allowed, but it takes a lot of permits and a lot of work to be qualified to run trips up here. They're heavily regulated, and that we actually got basically they do spot raids on ships all over the place, and in the most random places. I think we even got caught in here somewhere where they just came in behind us and knocked on the door. You got to shut down the boat. They do a full boat inspection, and if they find anything wrong, they can literally shut your entire expedition down on the spot, which they have done multiple times. So there's a bit of a nerve-wracking moment where the ELs, as they're called, the expedition leaders, eyes are a lot wider while they're trying to play it cool. They realize they're kind of in trouble. This is my first view. You guys seeing this okay?
Yeah. That reminds me of my Antarctica flight, like very similar sort of just looking out to this white mountainous landscape. It looks awesome.
And I begged and borrowed till the cows come home to get a window seat, and I didn't. So I'm literally leaning over like 5 people with an iPhone in my hand. And it's
just
you go.
I was just going to ask, in terms of flying in there, what sort of options you have, and that kind of aspect. Is there a lot of flights?
It's quite consistent, but like I said, as far as I know, they only fly through Norway. That's the only way in and out. I flew from Iceland and I had to go through Norway anyway. There's nothing direct, and it's either Oslo or Tromsø, I think it's called, and they're the 2 cities you pretty much, at the moment anyway, you 100% have to fly through, and it's usually just the one airline, maybe 2. So it is a little bit restricted. The landing's pretty welcoming. We landed into like unbelievably perfect blue sky conditions, and it almost didn't change for 14 days. And so we had one of the most incredible bodies of incredible weather that I've experienced. Like the EL was shaking his head by the end of the trip and just saying, I've done 100 trips up here and I've never seen anything like it. And you'll get a sense more. I stayed in a hotel called the Vault, and what's interesting about the Vault and interesting about Longyearbyen in particular, and I will spend a bit of time on this place because it's a very, very unique place, is there's actually an international seed vault there tucked away in an abandoned coal mine.
Oh, I've heard of that.
And it's actually a huge resource for the planet of all sorts of, organic and pure kind of seed content. And they actually just, before these floods actually happened in Libya, they actually just released a bunch of seeds to Libya who actually been through a lot of drought to try and help, resurrect the crops in their country. So it's actually a global resource. And, it's so cold up there and it's so isolated and tucked away. It's kind of a very good place to be doing that, really.
Mm.
First thing we did is walk around the foreshore, and this is actually Craig Tansley. And Craig is a multi-award-winning Australian travel writer, and I've actually been working with him all week. And actually, so keep your eye out on the Age and the Sydney Morning Herald this weekend, because I'll have a whole bunch of images on an article and hopefully the cover that Craig's written on this particular trip, actually. So it's a nice compliment with timing for the show and that in reality as well.
Yeah, cool.
Longyearbyen it actually only has 2,000 people. But out of those 2,000 people, there's 50 different nationalities. It runs partly on tourism. There is a big university there that's very much environmentally orientated and climate change and all that kind of thing. And there's also a bit of coal mining. And around the edges of all these hillsides, you'll see actually holes in the coal mines. And the original town literally just moved up the valley year by year, just following where the latest open coal mine was. Literally have reindeer walking right through the middle of the town. They literally just come up and chew right at your feet and just wander around town like they own the place.
Yeah, wow.
but you can't actually wander around anywhere you want. This is one of the main average shops you go through, and you're like, wow, what's going on with these shops here? Because they're half full of these. And one of the reasons is you can't physically go beyond the boundaries of the town without being risk of being killed by polar bears. And literally in 2020, somebody in the town on the edge of it was killed by a polar bear. And so you're not allowed to go anywhere without a guide who has a license for the rifle. And this is kind of why these guys are pretty big. And, you know, they're a huge part of the culture, and you know, it's a very real prospect. I've never been anywhere in the world where really that, you know, you have to be so careful. And they do have roads that run through the town itself, but they literally, once you get to the edge of the town, the roads don't exist anymore. There's no roads going anywhere.
Yeah, wow.
And the only way to get anywhere further is by boat or snowmobile. And there is 2,000 people and 5,000 snowmobiles, and you're everywhere.
Wow.
And there was just not quite enough snow to be going on some trips. There was definitely a few dog sleds running around. I actually bought these as the insoles because the fur on the creatures up there is incredible in terms of its capacity for heat and comfort. And one of the issues we had is we were getting given boots for the trip, but as far as I knew, they had no insoles, and so the insulation is a big factor when you're walking around in such a cold place. My favorite little place in Long Yemen is the Husky Cafe, and it literally is full of huskies, and they literally have real huskies coming in, and they change them around 2 or 3 times a day, and they run around a load place, sit on your lap, sniff at your food, and they're pretty friendly. And they're a big part of life up there as well, as in all Arctic places. They add a lot of character, and they're quite a functional way of how people get around as well. So this is the best I'm going to do in terms of giving you a sense of where we went, and particularly having any luck at all at trying to repeat the place names to you. And please don't ask me to. I'm pretty good overall, but I didn't. Unfortunately, my camera doesn't have a GPS on it, so I'm just going to be giving you that was up north or that was down south in terms of where it is, and you're going to have to come on a trip with me to find out in person. But essentially, these are the main stopping areas. So you're moving a lot on a trip like this. We're trying to cover a lot of ground, and you are literally, you know, when we're not, once we settle somewhere, we're moving to the next place pretty much the whole time. And the beauty of a boat this small is there's different permitting for boats relative to size to some extent. In the Arctic, in the Antarctic, everyone's kind of locked in that you have to pre-book where you're going, and you have to stick to it no matter what, weather, wildlife be damned. Whereas on a small boat like this, we kind of fit underneath the radar, and we can literally go wherever the heck we want, whenever we want, just in terms of as far as we can get through the sea ice. So we actually follow rumors about wildlife. You know, we change direction about 3 times based on the weather and the systems coming in. And it just meant we were always in the best place at the best time with the conditions, with the light and the access to wildlife. And these guys are super, super duper experienced at this. So here's some of the main crew. So this is Gary Miller. Gary Miller is an incredibly experienced polar region scientist, and his knowledge is almost second to none. And I don't know how he has the energy, but his whole life is doing expeditions even now. And he's not the youngest guy, but he's got the energy of a young man, and very, very humble man, but incredibly well knowledgeable. So even though he's a scientist on board and he's there a lot of the time for interpretation, his knowledge is so rich and so deep. He's lent on heavily for decisions about where to go, when to go, you know, how to read the ice. Ida back here was one of our main guides, and she's actually a world-class polar explorer, and she was part of an incredible project where 8 women actually made it to the North Pole from near Svalbard. And what was interesting about that is it was no women that had polar experience before, and she trained a lot of them up over a period of time. And these were women from Arabian countries and all different sort of countries around the world that literally put up their hand for an adventure and you know, can we do this? And they just went for it and actually made it. And she did a wonderful show on the trip about it. This is our trip doctor. This is Korba. He's one of our main guides. And this is Tim Cope. And if you haven't heard of Tim Cope, he's quite an amazing Australian. He's the author of a number of books already. He's a world explorer, and he's quite well known for doing a 3-year solo journey across the entire Mongolian plateau to Western Europe.
Wow.
With him and a dog and a horse. and he's written a beautiful book about it, which I'm reading right now. He did another sort of year and a half long trip from northern Russia all the way through to Ukraine. I think he's fluent in Russian, about 3 or 4 different languages, Mongolian, and he's a really amazing guy. And I was bunk rooms with him, and that actually had a huge impact on my trip. This is one of our main sea kayaking guides from Canada, absolute legend. One of our clients, and here, just to give you a sense, we're actually, it's 1,300 k's to the North Pole. It's 2,000 kilometers north of Oslo, where I flew from. And it is, I think I looked on Google Earth today, looking, it was 15,500 kilometers from where I live today. So when you're
that's a decent amount of distance, yeah.
Yeah, it is. And I got in trouble because I walked out on the end here and just sat there for a while, just watching the view. And somebody said, yeah, it's not safe sitting out here, brother, even though it's like the airport car park. It was just like, oh, whoa, this is a serious place, in terms of what's going on and what you have to go through. So, so that's a little bit of an entry point. I got so lucky with the weather that I actually ended up making a really beautiful kind of contemporary visual conversation about, this is literally the view as I arrived at the airport, looking out to sea. And it was just,
that's a great shot.
Space and breadth and solace and power. It kind of starts giving you a bit of a taster of the kind of qualities and characteristics that this place has in absolute spades. And I wasn't expecting this. I just come from Iceland, and what I found in Iceland is all the buildings look the same. And in fact, it found an awesome pot. They're all whitewashed walls with red roofs, whether it's a engineering shop or a restaurant or a hotel, or they all, I couldn't even tell the difference between any of them. And you get into Longyearbyen, and all of a sudden it's like Legoland. And there's just incredible pops of color just everywhere. And, for somewhere that really, in the scheme of the world, is just around the corner, relatively speaking, it was really profoundly different. And it had a beautiful character. You can see actually here some of the leftover coal mining kind of paraphernalia in the top there. And you'll see the open entries to a lot of the mines that are still, some of them are even active around there still. Coal mining was easily one of the biggest reasons that got developed. The Russians in particular have a lot of working mines still in different places around Svalbard as well. It's slowly winding down a little bit, but it's still active. And this was literally the first night. I think I ended up wandering around until 2:30 in the morning. And as those of you that have had, the midnight sun, 24 hours daylight, there's no cap on what you do and when you do it, except your own personal sort of internal energy.
That's a very dangerous combination for you, Paul, Mr. 3 a.m.
I'm already that way inclined, so I did not get a lot of sleep on this trip, I'll tell you, for a number of reasons.
I have seen some of these. You go, Ben.
I was just going to say, do you know if those colorful buildings are to help stand out from the white, snowy, stark landscape, or if it's just for a pop of color in, where it's dark 24/7?
I walked down on the waterfront and I ended up meeting one of the locals. He's about 77. And I had a great conversation with him after spending some time with this dog. And he wasn't, coming up to me, but I slowly kind of spent time and eased into the conversation as you do when you're a respectful traveler. You don't sort of go in people's face. And he ended up sitting down with me for about half an hour and talking about his life. He's been there for 47 years. And, he said there's probably 10 days a year like this. And we had 10 days almost like it the whole time. And this always sort of feels a bit like Jeffrey Smart, I was just like, wow, it was the juxtaposition with the mountain ranges that you're pretty much surrounded by. It is right on the water's edge as well. But I just had a field day, and I borrowed a 100 to 500 lens off my dear friend Andrew Phipps. 3 months of negotiation to let me borrow it. and I got a lot of use out of it. And here, here's some of the locals walking down the scene, and here's some of the other locals. There's a lot of wildlife literally walking in and around everywhere. And these guys are a type of geese, and they're particularly in pairs. And there's probably, I saw about 17 pairs in and around town, and probably maybe I saw 8 or 9 reindeer in different sort of areas around the town. So there's a few cars, but they literally, they can go 3 kilometers at best, and that's it, maybe 4, because there's no roads outside of that. So literally, if you're doing your shopping and getting around, snowmobiles is the #1 form of transportation. And I'm not joking, 5,000 snowmobiles. I'd love to go back in winter where that's the way of getting around. And also, the dog sleds as well is another way people get around. And you can literally, they have a big dog area out of town, and you can literally just hear them in the distance. But they're right on the edge of town, so you've got to be careful going up there. And I'm sure they attract the polar bears as well, just by being what they are. I actually first heard about Svalbard when I heard about I saw a mini documentary on a collapse of a snowbank that came through, and it wiped out a large part of the town and killed a lot of people.
Oh, wow.
And these are actually built in response to that. They're actually barriers to the snow cascading down into the town. So it's a bit of a brutal history there. And it's quite an interesting documentary, and it's actually facilitated by the chaplain of the town too. So in the background above here is actually the seed bowl. It's actually inside the mountain back here, and you're not physically allowed in there because it's an isolated global resource that needs to be kept sort of in pristine condition from bacteria and viruses and all the rest as well. So you'll see aspects of the kind of commercial aspects of mining sort of left over through the town. You can see some of the alleyways as you're coming into town. So it's a very curious town. You'll see a lot of piping that runs through the town that's actually, none of it's underground, it's kept in the open. And I think that helps with the freezing and the ability to keep liquids and water and things moving through the town. And you'll see a lot of piping through here. So it's quite an open part of the infrastructure of how the town works, which is quite interesting. Beautifully still night. I think it was 2:30, 3 in the morning. I can't remember, but I kind of got lucky. It was the best light to do it, and other people sort of had a crack at it later on, and they got a little bit more, a little bit less good light. And all around here, like the ski marks just everywhere. So all the locals just ski around the back of the town and come back and go around all these shoots just for an afternoon bit of exercise. Instead of walking the dog, they'll grab their slick skins and go head up the mountain just everywhere. And on being a skier, I was just like, a bit jealous. And if you're really lazy, you can jump on a snowmobile and get yourself up there and get a mate to drop you off. There's a few huts up on the top of the town, but you're not allowed up there unless, you're literally risking polar bear action up there as well. This is kind of like the middle of the town. There's about 3 or 4 kind of pubs through the town. There's some great restaurants, but it's fairly simple. There are a lot of good outdoor stores with great equipment, just so you know. There's a lot of cool dudes walking around the streets. There's some really interesting street signs there for quite random things. Here's your rawhide seat at one of the other, this is the northernmost end of town with the coal miners' cabins and the northernmost sort of bar in the town, which is a pretty cool little spot, sort of tucked away. A lot of horse riders running through, a lot of Arctic kind of horses similar to the ones that you'd find in Iceland and places. But very unusual place. And I literally was sitting up here and enjoying the view early on, and the car park, the airport's just here, and I literally got told off. Said, you're asking for trouble there, brother. And it's quite a different mindset to be in a place that isn't necessarily safe to just wander around in. And here's where I stayed in the seed bowl. Here's the resident reindeer just wandering across right in front of me. It literally came and nibbled on my toes and then walked past me. And this is actually, it's not coming up so well. I've got a better shot on my R5, but this is one of those ice kind of, it's actually had a double one.
Sundog?
It's a sundog. And there's another, you can just see the edge of the double one. It was incredible.
Oh, wow. Big solar. Yeah.
I had
22-degree halo.
Yeah, it was just a perfect timing moment, angled to the horizon and everything. I'm not really leaning into it too here with this iPhone shot, but it was a place that just kept on giving. A lot of things I've just never seen in my life just kept coming back at me. So I'll jump into some people sort of aspects. So here's Toby. So he's the reason I got there, and he's also who Lukey's working with in Antarctica as well. And he's been a sea guide for a long time. He's also, got degrees in environmental management, that kind of thing as well. And he lives here in Hobart. I was literally just at his house a couple of days ago having dinner. Great man to know. And he's hands-on. He's the CEO, but he still can't quite let go of just the guiding part. So he's still running out on these wonderful trips. This is my good mate Tim Cope now, who I knew of and I'd met a couple of times before, but spending 10 days in a shoebox is a really fast way to get to know someone. Good, bad, and otherwise. And this is our little shoebox that we shared. And he was oscillating between running out on the sea kayaking, and you have to wear the full dry suits and that kind of thing. This is my working office a lot of the time. So Tim had to put up with bits and pieces and multiple drones and 6 different cameras just everywhere. And he is a great photographer, but he only bought sort of one camera, one lens, I think. And lent into the experience, and he did a lot of writing for the trip. We actually produced a book about the trip as well, which just arrived. This is a little bit less glamorous, so we'll see how it comes out. But this is kind of how I greeted Tim kind of area. Jimmy boy, have a bit of fun there, mate.
to rip your hair off there, man. Like, seriously. This looks nasty. Oh.
Going again.
Show us the head here. Give us a swirl.
Oh, I'm sure he'd appreciate me doing that. Good on you.
Oh dear.
So yeah, you literally rip your hair off trying to get those things on and off. And here's the three of us, you know. Toby and Tim have been friends for a long time as well, and worked together in a lot of ways. And this was actually the northernmost part of the trip. This is about 1:30 in the morning. Everyone's gone to sleep. Usually we were moving around that time of night. And I had worked very, very hard to get permissions to fly up there. And I had to sit all these Norwegian exams and get all these sort of obscure permits and you know, send in all the insurances, that kind of thing. But I did it. And this night was probably the most incredible night of flying in my life. I literally was given permission by the captain to fly all night for 6 hours. And I got my 9 batteries out and all I did was fly. And I was up there on my own. And it was so quiet. And it was literally only like -2 or even just 0. It was no wind. And
Yeah,
I was
wow.
almost at 80 degrees north. So I would have been one of the most northernmost people in the world at the time. And it was just one of those moments in life where I just shook my head and just went, oh my God, how did I get here? And will this ever happen again? And what an incredible privilege. And yeah, and to share it with 2 really good friends was super special. They both got out their sat phones and they rang their wives and we made jokes, and it was kind of one of those really, really, really special moments to share as 3 friends. And we literally were the only ones up on the boat, apart from, of course, the captain or whoever's on deck. There has to be there regardless of what's going on the whole time. But super, super special moment. And speaking of which, I might actually segue and show a beautiful film, which I haven't shown publicly at all. This will be the inaugural release. So hopefully the sound will work. But either way, just to lead into the visuals, I literally got a hold of one of the brand new Mavic 3 Pros, and there was almost none in Australia. It was the first week they got released, and I couldn't even get one. And I literally had to buy one in Sydney, had to race out between flights. I had like 90 minutes to get out to heart of Sydney, back again to catch my flight to the Middle East, or I was going to miss it. And of course, my flight from Hobart was late, and I'm like, oh God. And I miraculously managed to make it, as I did in Hoelen style, and I got to shoot. And what's spectacularly different about this, and for the drone tuners that know, the level of compression, this shot here is shot at 166 millimeters. And the second shot is the same boat at 70 millimeters. And what traditionally, if you've been a drone pilot before, they're pretty much all between 22, 24, and 28. And it's just a fixed wide angle lens, and that's it. So to have a drone that has 3 levels of telephoto options changes the game hugely, particularly in terms of access to wildlife and the level of compression, the kind of cinematic look that you can do for things. But I will quietly let you enjoy this, and it'll run for about 4.5 minutes. Booyah. There you go.
Man, how about that? What a landscape.
Oh
My
my God,
goodness.
take me back. I'm sort of like getting a bit choked up. I was like, oh my God, this place is, yeah.
You've captured that beautifully, Paul. That's yeah, you've definitely made the most of that drone. That, yeah, fantastic footage there.
Very
Yeah,
envious you're able to get up and have that much time, that much air time. That's a real gift.
It really was. I mean, it had a cost because pretty much the only time I could fly was when everyone else is asleep. And of course, because I'm working with clients, you know, during the day as well, and running all the expeditions out on the Zodiacs and that kind of thing. But yeah, that moments like that make it worth it. I was so excited and was so energized in being up there. I didn't feel like I needed as much sleep either, to be honest. I meant to introduce the Pioneer a little bit earlier, but now it seems like a pretty appropriate time. To be perfectly honest, the word on the street is this particular model of ships. They're old Russian spy ships that have been converted basically, and they were designed by the Russians and built by the Finnish. Incredibly robust. It's actually a 50 berth, the Polar Pioneer, but it's a very, very capable. It's not an icebreaker as such. They have different kind of ratings, but it is quite a powerful, thick-hulled boat and very, very, very capable of getting most places on the Earth. And what's beautiful about it is you can see how low and how open all the structures are for viewing, both on the front and the back. And on the bigger boats, which, to be honest, I haven't been on, Lukey has. As far as I know, they're a lot higher. So your accessibility to getting those kind of front-on wildlife shots is beautiful here. And sitting on the back with flying birds and albatross and different things. And you're allowed all the way up through the different levels of the deck, all the way through. So there's a lot of freedom to roam. And
my understanding, what's special about this one, if you can see the people leaning over the front of the boat right on the bow, it's a lot harder to do that with some of the larger vessels. Certainly the one that I was on with Intrepid was very difficult to do that kind of thing. So it's quite a special experience to be able to lean out and just watch the boat sort of crunching into the ice, I'm sure. So that's quite special.
You noticed in the video, I left that for quite a period of time, and I think rather one of the reasons I did, because that was one of the most mesmerizing experiences I've ever had in terms of travel and an expedition, is moving through pack ice in one of the most northern places in the world at like 80 degrees north. It's like, I can't even describe it, the sounds and the vibrations going through the boat and the fissures and cracks running through. And they actually have to be very, very specific about the thickness of ice they're allowed through, because this is actually habitat for polar bears and hunting grounds. So at a certain level of thickness, you're not actually allowed to move through it. So they have to be very, very specific about where and how they move through the pack ice so they don't disturb the hunting grounds. This is there. Since you see all the sea kayaks that have dragged them, they literally had to be taken on and off every day by crane to get in and out of the water. We had 5 Zodiacs, which for 40 people is pretty amazing. We had a dedicated photography Zodiac the whole time, which was just amazing. Just having the freedom to just, you know, pretty much choose when and where we went. You know, we do go out collectively as a group, usually twice a day, sometimes 3, and in and around the beautiful meals that we get served, obviously. But again, you can see just how open. I mean, the amount of time I had out here on my own, I lost count, you know, especially in the wee hours. But the amount of room, all the angles you can choose, how low you can get, you can lean right over the side. I didn't get really, really low at the back at eye height, not quite eye height level, but pretty close with a longer lens to wildlife. So it's beautifully set up for that. That's just an iPhone shot, but you also get that sense of breadth and accessibility. Not for the faint-hearted. Landing drones on a moving boat, as Luke knows more than anyone I know. I actually have to thank out loud Tim Cope in particular. He caddied me for pretty much all the tricky landings. He was brilliant, and that wasn't his job. He is a drone pilot himself, and has been. He's got some beautiful work in Mongolia that he's shot on my drone, and he's probably been droning for longer than I have. But I've been pretty intensely at it for the last sort of 3 or 4 years, and getting a lot more confident. But yeah, a few close calls as usual, but I managed to get everything back intact. Didn't lose anything. No lost drones and no dramas. And I was obviously being particularly careful for a number of reasons. Partly, you know, it's not just about me. You know, if there's any sign of any wildlife, I'm out of there. But at the same time, do you remember that shot, Ben and Luke, whereas there was people on the horizon, and I did a slow, really long cinematic kind of sweep left to right, and the people were just standing on like a rock shelf. That was from a kilometer away.
Yeah, wow.
More than a kilometer at 166 mils. So what's going to change the game, I think, for documentary filming is being able to do, and you can do 4K 60p video at 166 mil.
Wow.
And that means you can be well outside the kind of ratings for how close you're allowed to be to wildlife in particular and still get incredible footage, which is never possible with the drone before. You get it with a 24 mil, you got to be close, or they're just little specks. So it's a little bit of a game changer, I think, in terms of what it's going to allow people to do. So I was kind of figuring it out. I did have 10 days or 8 days in Iceland where I was working it pretty hard in terms of figuring it all out. And I actually got lucky. A friend of mine, Roger Fishman, set me up with, he's been on the show actually. He set me up with, so I'm getting distracted, with some of the best drone pilots in Iceland. And here we go. Here's my best impression of Amundsen. Apparently, there's some really amazing history around. I didn't realize that Amundsen and who else was it were doing the front edge of aerial exploration in the Arctic. And there's some crazy stories of just using hot air balloons and crashing on ice and disappearing for 3 months. And there's some radical stuff that went on with those early pioneers. It was an incredible museum I went to in Norway that spoke a lot heavily to the pioneering history up there. So here's the office. She ain't pretty, but she's pretty functional. Well, you might see something pretty spectacular down there, which is pretty cool. I'll show you that in a second. And when you've got 3 cameras and 2 drones and 12, 15 batteries and GoPros, and gimbals, everything going on, it's pretty insane. And this tiny little place. So hats off again to Tim. This was our EL. So this was David. Him and his twin brother and his father are all high-end expedition leaders in polar regions in the world. And I've spoken about Ida, Ryan and Ida, actually, they ran the trip afterwards. And the trip afterwards was literally the Thomas Heaton trip. And there's a wonderful video. I met Thomas at the Husky Cafe, actually, just when I got back. And I gave him a few tips in terms of what to do or not do on the boat, particularly around the ELs, because they have a lot of power. Like, I was lucky to fly for, even though I had all the permits, your captain or EL can, if they don't like you or they don't trust you, they can just shut you down instantly. You can never fly again. And I know people that have gone there with all the permits and the captain's like, no one's flying. And because I built up that trust slowly and did all the right things and came in exactly when they wanted and didn't push anything, I was sort of playing the long game. They watched the respectfulness and the professionalism that I operated. And in the end, they actually used me a number of times for scouting. Knock on the door, 6:30, we need you. Can you bring the drone up? And we were getting, swamped in by pack ice overnight unexpectedly. We're trying to figure out how to get out. And twice they told me I literally saved the boat half a day sailing, which is also thousands and thousands of dollars of diesel. So they were pretty, it was a real fluid relationship and it ended up working beautifully. And the greatest gift is when that one night where we were still, the captain's like, you've got the floor, you can fly all night long. And it was the best conditions of the whole trip, right in the pack ice. And I was just like, it was a dream. And I don't think he would have allowed me if I wasn't doing that. It's my good buddy, Devin, who is currently in Fiji, where I'm heading to in a few weeks. He sea kayaks all around the world. He's a crazy Canadian. That's the crew I introduced you to before. So I've been through those. There was a couple that I missed. Well, what I will introduce you to now is the wildlife.
Yes, please.
This is actually one of my favorite photographs from the trip.
Yeah,
and again, big thank you to Andrew. I had a Canon RF with a 100 to 500 and a 1.4 extender. So I was at about 700 odd mil here. And I wasn't cropping in much. The Arctic foxes are incredibly nimble. They're very fast moving. They're very, I'd say they're confident rather than bold. And they're so agile the way they bounce around everything. And what's particularly interesting here is we're in the change of seasons. So in the winter, these are pure white. And you almost can't see them unless you see a pop of the bottom of their feet or maybe their eyes or the tip of the nose. They just blend in. And in the summer, when the ice starts melting away, they move to a dark brown.
Yeah, wow.
And this is right in the middle of that transition of coats. So it's a really kind of unusual time to find it. It might only be a few weeks that they're transitioning from one to the other. So and I actually felt like, well, that lent into a black and white kind of interpretation because it sort of strengthened that contrast. But magnificent creatures, very, very elegant, very, 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 very thin and wiry, very, very clever. They spend a lot of their time around below a lot of the big bird cliffs, waiting for, a baby to fall out of the nest or one to actually have a fight or fall out of the sky. That's one of the main food sources. We only saw them individually. This one in particular, I think we had half an hour with it. We had another one, we had almost an hour. So, and when you're skimming along, you're not allowed to go after wildlife, but if it comes to you, particularly polar bears, you're allowed to stay present in a safe way, but you can't actually go actively looking for polar bears in particular. So here was pretty much the first evidence we saw of a polar bear. So these are literally paw prints, and this is the backbone of a seal. And what I feel like is quite evocative about this image, it speaks to both the beauty and the harshness of this landscape and the life cycle there. You know, it's the cold edge. The Arctic, the Norse name for Svalbard is the cold edge. It's literally the interpretation of it. And you know, there's a certain harshness to in a place like that, as well as that quiet beauty. And to me, this is quite an interesting narrative piece in terms of that conversation. This is a beautiful ring seal. They're a little bit quieter. They have beautiful soft eyes. Like they just feel so sort of welcoming and warm and very gentle in terms of their nature. I'm sure there's times when they're not. This was one of the big moments of the trip. You know, seeing a bear is a very rare occurrence, and it's not a given no matter what trip you do. I think we had one major sighting. This guy gave us a big high five. He did a big yoga routine for about 10 minutes where there was just legs going everywhere, and then he just gave up on us and went to sleep. So, but we had a good half an hour of just enjoying his company. And we were like, sighting a polar bear is an interesting experience, because if you're on land and you spot a polar bear, you can't hang around. You got to get out of there as fast as you possibly can, because they are the most cunning and incredible hunters, arguably on Earth. Their sense of smell is phenomenal. Their intelligence of how they move through a landscape and keep themselves tucked under so you can not visibly see them, or walk all the way around the back of you so you can't smell. They're ruthless hunters, and people are right on the menu. No problems at all. There's a lot of species where it's a bit more rare that if they had the opportunity, they'd hunt a human, but not with polar bears. You're fresh meat just like anything else. And you know, and their environment is being challenged, you know, through global warming, and it's going to become, you know, there's going to be a lot of hungry polar bears up there. So but incredible experience. They're huge, they're powerful, they're beautiful. This is a bearded seal, and they actually use these huge, big, long whiskers to do a lot of their hunting, and to feel around certain areas to find things. And they have
that golden head on it as well.
Yeah, they all have this big golden orb for a head, and again, beautiful soft eyes. You know, the nature of them just feels gorgeous. You know, they're big creatures though. I mean, they're not as big as walruses, but they're pretty big. These guys are huge, so they grow up to 2 tons, and their tusks can be up to 5 kilograms. So we actually, what's different about walruses is they mainly hunt mussels. They're quite big and they're quite heavy, and they're a bit lazy on land, and they're very slow. So they tend to live on these flat, open areas, rather than like a lot of the other wildlife, particularly birds, which are on cliff edges and places that are difficult to get to. Penguins, which obviously don't have in the north, are a bit like that too. They want to get out of the way, and it's hard to reach places, but walruses don't. They're literally the flattest, easiest, closest place to the water they possibly can get. And usually they're in groups of males. This is a big group of males. And what's really interesting about it, and there is a scientific word for it, they are completely addicted to touch, and they just have to be in contact with each other all the time. And they're literally just rolling on top of each other and slapping each other entirely every second you see them. And they'll literally get up and jab the guy next to them with their big tusk and get in a fight, and a second later they'll fall asleep on the same one. It's just this cacophony of comical kind of life, just watching them. Smelliest creatures I've ever come across in my life. And with the right guidance, we had this very, very slow, measured approach over about 40 minutes where we got sort of this close to them. Just, you know, the guides are super experienced, and they're all qualified and permitted to be able to access wildlife in certain ways with certain rules. And when we got super close to these guys, actually. So this is Svalbard reindeer, and it is unique to Svalbard, and they're quite heavy set, they're quite solid, and they're quite short-legged relative to some of the Northern European reindeer, particularly in Sweden and Finland. So they're quite unique in that way. And if you look at
they definitely look like more stocky than, like, I remember seeing them in that one we did on Lapland. Definitely a different, more almost like that one looks like a bison almost like a miniature. Definitely different looking animals.
And you know, you can get fairly close, like out in the wild, and some of those places are not so used to people being around. It's not exactly heavily populated. What's interesting about this species is both the males and the females have antlers, which is quite unusual. and both of them cycle through and they fall off every season. So you'll find antlers around quite a few places. Yeah, beautiful creatures to photograph too in the environment. And the puffins. There's just
Look at that.
Just something about them. They just the color, the character, almost like the melancholy look in their eyes. I'm not quite sure what it is, but they're not easily accessible in the Arctic, but they are there. And I think the major puffin cliff, I think we couldn't get to because of the sea ice on this particular trip. But we did get to see a number both flying and still bobbing around. They weren't super keen to get close to us. So again, I'm shooting at 700 mil out of a moving Zodiac with these ones, but it was beautiful. Just the sense of character.
They're amazing. You mightn't have the penguins, but that definitely makes up for it.
I think it helps. I'm looking forward to you get to know those penguins. That's just a world unto itself, I think. See the ptarmigans, I think they're one of the main native birds there, and they have the male and females that pair up, and the female was down below just quietly clucking away in sort of a soft sort of browny grey unassuming way, and the ptarmigan's up there bold as brass on the highest point. Here I am, quite a confident bird actually, and we weren't too far away. It was quite comfortable, just letting us know it was the boss or whatever it was trying to tell us. Now these, Toby told me there, I'll just look it up. They're black guillemots, I think it is. Yeah, good. Guillemot. There's quite a few of them around. There's another species of bird which was called fulmars, I think, which were really built up on a lot of the cliffs. Here's my big walrus mate. That was one of the more fun time sort of shots we got. This one was quite isolated. He was usually on his own, but he gave us quite a show for about half an hour, jumping in and around different pieces of ice. This was this guy just coming out of the water. You can see why they're pretty slow on land. Very difficult to hunt. Not in they're very easy in that they're incredibly accessible and very slow on land. But you can't just go up and club it. Their hide is so thick. They actually had to invent special weapons to be able to hunt them. These huge, big, long hook spears and makeshift things to get through, and they had to sort of aim for the heart and the kidneys in different areas. Not that I'm into that sort of thing, but that was, quite a big part of what made this area really. Before there was mining, the Arctic hunting was very, very rich, and it was quite a big trade, and it added a lot to a lot of the economy of the Russia in particular in the early days, particularly in the 1700s and 1840s with the pomars. But it was interesting. You can't quite see it here, but I've got a video where it actually looks like a heat shimmer in the background. It's the only place I found that, and it doesn't make much sense because it's below zero, but it was quite unusual sort of conditions, even though it was really, really still. So these are the fulmars, and they're probably the most prolific birds there.
Oh, that's a gorgeous shot.
Yeah, they're quite loud. They're very active. They're very dynamic. They're pretty fun. And when you see these sea cliffs that have like 10,000 fulmars in there, just swinging around and just running on the helixes of the different sort of thermals and different things, they really cool. They do look a lot like gulls, but they're a bit bigger, and their coloration's a bit different, and their characteristics are a little bit different, I think. But yeah, beautifully photogenic in a lot of places. And of course, the beauty of being these Zodiacs is the accessibility is incredible, where you can get around to, and you're at that eye height almost the whole time. It's a wonderful tool as a photographer. We're literally bumping nose on the ice here, and I'm shooting at like 16 mil to get that, and the accessibility of that is wonderful.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, beautiful thing to do. So
I loved the layers in the ice in that first shot of these birds you showed.
It's sort of it's
gorgeous.
A lot of
lovely, like perfect light for it too, like the kind of slightly diluted by the high cloud. A little bit of direction, and also enough to bring a little bit of color out in the ice, which I'll get into the ice next. Actually, that's going to be my next kind of foray. And yeah, they can just literally just fill the air. This is a different kind of turn. I'm trying to think which one it is, but so there is quite a lot of variety in terms of the bird life. We had a lot of lectures on the boat, and here we had a pod of 50 beluga whales. And here I'm actually I'm not close, but I'm not. Yeah, I'm way. I'm probably almost a kilometer away with a 70 mil lens, sort of shooting down, because I obviously had to keep well away from that. But it was pretty. Unfortunately, the drone was so new, they hadn't even invented a polarizer filter yet, so I didn't have one. It didn't really affect a lot of my shots, but it would have been nice particularly for a shot like that, because that was a fleeting moment. And beluga whales are a bit unusual. They don't have a top fin, so they're just flat rounded on the top. So if you're actually trying to see them surface, you won't see
the regular kind of fin that you will in order to spot them. There's just like a soft curve, and they're very, very white and their coloration, but they're beautiful natured and they're quite curious. So a big, big part of polar life is the wildlife there, and just as big, if not more beautiful part is the ice. You know, the cold edge. And
Yeah, wow.
My first flight of the drone, and unfortunately it started raining and I was getting a bit nervous. You see the boat back
amazing.
somewhere, and I came back and the whole
You can
thing
see
was
some
like
drops of
wet.
rain in that shot, actually, streaking on the right-hand side.
Yeah. So it was edgy. My first
You
flight.
sort of know if Paul's nervous, then it's actually pretty curious.
But you know, I still had, you know, straight line of sight. The signal was really good, and you know, I kept to that the whole time. Just never went behind anything or anything else. But this is actually a 9-image stitch, actually. So it's covering a lot of breadth. I don't know what sort of degrees.
Do you use the in-camera pano mode, or do you just manually do the shots to?
I did for this one because I was in a hurry, and I wasn't sure if I should start because it started to rain. And the advantage of that is it does a really good job of it. The disadvantage of that is you come out with a JPEG, which is quite a major disadvantage in post. But for the brevity of it, it still tells a story, and it might still print okay. And sometimes I compromise that because it's a lot of time to take, a lot more time to shoot manually and do it bit by bit. And it's harder not to get the overlaps right and that kind of thing. But yeah, so I mixed and matched a bit, Lucky. So what was special about this, you can't get this shot. This is a carving glacier, and the glacier fronts are massive. Probably shot this about 500 mil. You're not allowed to within more than 200 meters of a carving glacier and the reasons being, you're quite likely to get your head caved in if you go any closer. And some of those
very dangerous
are like multiple story buildings, and if they come down, they could literally swamp your boat and flip you over.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the ice itself hitting you, but then it can launch off a kind of tsunami wave, and so then that can take you out as well if you're in a zodiac nearby or what have you. So very dangerous.
I wonder if they have a different distance in the Arctic and the Antarctic. Like, do you know how many meters it is in the Antarctic?
I'm not game to give an exact answer on that, but yeah, it's a decent distance anyway. And you just there's always that risk, and I guess with things warming up, it's just going to be happening more too.
Yeah, it looks absolutely colossal, like just massive scale.
You know, I think, you know, the scale of things changes around the world. Svalbard's really impressive. I mean, Greenland are even bigger, and I'm not sure if they're bigger again in the Antarctic. I'm guessing they might be in certain areas. So,
there's some pretty insane walls there.
More than impressive enough. And what's unusual about this is normally you hear a crack, and it's almost like thunder or a gunshot. And if you've heard it, you're basically already too late, because by the time the sound travels to you, it's already happened. So I just happened to be pointing the camera exactly at the spot with a 500mm lens when this happened. It was a complete fluke.
And it can echo around too, so you never know exactly where it came from.
From. So I've actually got the falling ice itself before it even hit the water, or as it was hitting. So, and I got a beautiful sequence of it too. So that was a bit of a gift. I mean, it's a healthy regular cycle, but it's also tied in with that conversation about global warming, that it's happening more and more and more as the cycle goes through. This was one of the most
colors.
Quirky and unusual and characterized bits of ice we ever came across. And this one had actually flipped itself back upside down from being right way up. So we're looking at sort of the underside of it, which you don't always get to do. But you've got to be careful moving around these icebergs, because as you probably learned or didn't know already, the icebergs are often larger, almost 90% of the time underwater than they are over. And if they suddenly start to roll, which they can do randomly at any time, all of a sudden you've got this larger piece of ice just pulling all the way around you and swirling things around, and potentially could flip you. And I've seen videos of it happening. But this piece, it almost looked like a piece of emerald or something, like crystal.
I was going to say there's really crystalline kind of like texture in there, just the glow of it. It's like a green quartz, like it's wild. Yeah.
I mean, I've never experienced anything like it. And the characterization of all this pocket and scalloping in there, you know, like if you've never been, it's just incredible sculpture of nature. Like the different forces involved and the different colorations are a big part of it as well. The colorations are a lot to do with how much oxygen or air actually is still intact. So you'll come across smaller ones and they'll slowly build up. This was probably the first sort of blue one I came across literally on the first day. I think that one was. And this was leaning out over the boat with I think either a 16 or a 14 mil wide lens, almost touching the water, just trying to get that corner to corner edge with a little bit of the halo of what sun was there behind, and that sense of flow and shape. And you don't often get a lot of say about your compositions because you're in a moving boat with lots of people, and there's lots going on, and safety is number one in terms of where and how. But in a specialized,
when you say a boat, was that a Zodiac?
Zodiac,
yeah.
So, but on a trip like this, where you've got a dedicated photographic component, and you work with the same guides every day, and you build up trust with each other, and communication, you get to be very nuanced about how to position yourself as good as you possibly can, so everyone can get a good shot. And that was a beautiful part of a smaller trip. Well, and is with the same team, and also the turnaround to physically get on the boats is really quick on a smaller boat. I think a lot of the bigger boats they've got to get hundreds of people out there as opposed to just 30 or 40. So, and 5 boats between 30, 40 people, it's pretty quick actually. And that means you can be quite nimble and spend more time out there. I almost fell in on this one. I was tippy-toeing on the nose of the boat, standing up with a 16 mil with my arms fully extended up in the air, trying to shoot this with a polarizer on to get the depth. And I think it has a lot of character, and that kind of juxtaposition of above and below, and that mirroring is present. And if I didn't get higher, I would have lost the depth with that scene in the background, the moon of the sky, which is what I worked hard to sort of get.
Do you find it too hard to represent the same blues that you actually saw there? I found that the digital files really can't even encompass the richness of some of those.
You'll see a shift through here. These were the bluest blues we came across, and yeah, it is. It's sort of hard to encapsulate and get the hues exactly right to what you saw visually. This was probably the best day I had of the trip in terms of that coloration. It was a dark, soft, moody, beautiful day with no wind at all, lots of reflections, and somehow, in a strange way, it seemed to bring out the color more. It almost looked like it was glowing from the inside rather than being reflected. And this one, I feel like it looks like the Nautilus from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or something like that to me. Like, it looks like a ship. And I think I chose that as, or a similar one to that. Oh, I think it was that one actually for the cover shot for the show. And what happens with the coloration is there's so much. The glaciers basically they start off as fallen snow, and over time they slowly compress with layering until they just push it into ice form. And that added pressure on the older ice actually squeeze all the air slowly out of it. So white ice basically is full of air, and blue ice basically has had a lot of the air compressed out of it. But it doesn't happen easily, and it takes a lot of time for that to happen, and often it'll only get released right at the bottom at the end of a glacier with ice that has been in there for a very, very long time, and it had a lot of force applied to it to compress the air out of it, and that's where that coloration comes in. But as Lukey well knows, like it's just unlimited the amount of forms and shapes and moods and characterizations that they can have. And
they're really just sculptures in their own right, icebergs. I mean, you could do a whole photographic series just on those alone, let alone the amazing landscape that you're actually within, and the scope for macro or little abstract shots and close-ups and playing with the colors and the repetition. It's just limitless, really.
And the way that view changes every second when you're in a moving boat, the interrelationship between and the depth, what's behind, and the characterization of layering, it's a wonderful canvas. And partly for that reason, Loki, I came up with an idea to just compartmentalize the photos, because I felt like the ice just needs its own voice, its own place. It's such a unique and special part of the experience up there to get so up and close. And
in my Antarctica talk too, I sort of said how there's almost discrete times as well. It's almost like 3 kinds of photography in this trip. You've got the ones on the main ship, the ones on the Zodiac cruise, and then when you're actually on land, and you're actually in almost those different modes. And certainly shooting these sort of icy scenes is a completely different mode, isn't it?
Yeah, and just speaking of the scene, like pretty much I never got a tripod out the whole trip. Everything's pretty much shot by hand the entire trip, start to finish. And it's, it means you got to be a little bit on your toes with shutter speeds and be a little bit flexible. I think zooms are a real asset in this sort of environment, particularly when you're moving close and far away from objects at certain speed, and you don't have the time literally to change lenses and that kind of thing. I won't go too far into the technicals. I feel like Wicky's done that really well, and we talked about that quite a bit on the earlier Svalbard show, but definitely the aesthetics is something I wanted to lean into. And, you know, it's interesting how the coloration, it's almost like mustard and green sort of coming out the back of these blues to a cool white. So, and
it almost looks like moldy, like.
Yeah, like it's pulled out.
Yeah, they get algal growth on the ice, so I wouldn't be
Gotcha.
surprised if that's that's what you're looking at there.
And you can see tiny icicles within the icicles, you know, like and just the amount of different textures and shapes just going around one iceberg was phenomenal.
I see. If you go back to that, Paul, it looks like a sort of piranha sort of face. There's like that little circle right in the middle. It's like it's facing towards the left.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like some sort of freaky fish.
I see like bunny ears, you know, like these are the.
I see that too, actually.
Donnie Darko style. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And some of them feel soft, and some of them feel hard, and some of them feel edgy, and some of them feel old, and some of them feel quiet. They all have their own sort of personality and characteristics. And like Lucy said, you know, this one feels like a spaceship or something. Like I mean, how is that even created with that angular kind of? There's a lot of dynamism and energy and movement and structure, you know, wrapped around this one, which was one of the more unique ones we sort of came across. And this it was just so ridged, so scalloped, and moving around this, you know, with a mountain in the background or people even, and there was lots of different conversations.
So much good, just patterns and texture. Yeah, it's fantastic.
That was a little bit more of, you know, that ice sheet, what you sort of feel like you would come across, but it has lots of lateral faces to it, where some of them feel rounded, and some of them feel pointed, and some of them feel softer, and that gives a little bit of scale to how close you can get. And like Lucky was suggesting, how abstract you can get, because you get so close, you can really play. I think one of my clients, you pretty much used 100 to 400 mil the entire time, almost. And I'm working with her, and I was just working with her 3 hours this morning, actually curating a book, and on largely on abstractions of everything in that environment. And again, that's the same iceberg, different angle with a different context in the background, and gives it a you know, different kind of depth and sense of place. And sort of mood, and that's getting it really.
Oh, look at that!
One of the sort of bigger ones, sort of looping over, and she's got some magnificent ones with this. She was shooting this with a long lens.
Yeah, fantastic.
Isolating tiny features. This is actually like a 16 mil, so it's pretty close.
Yeah, wow, that's gorgeous. So
much
like, great texture.
It's like being in a room, you know, like a backlit light room or something. It was beautiful.
Yeah, wow.
And this was
look at that,
right head on the icicles, you know, like I didn't get to get into ice cave in Iceland because it was the wrong season, but I can imagine what it must be like. A little bit, I got a little bit of insight into that, and some of the underhangs and deeper cliffs of some of these icebergs that had actually went back in quite a fair way.
Probably had more light to deal with it in those sort of scenarios than you might have had in an ice cave too. So
yeah, exactly, because you've got the ambient light sort of bouncing around from the environment coming in. Yeah, good point. So shooting by hand is a lot easier. That's a little bit more subdued, but you can just sense the sense of mood and drama in the place is beautiful. God, I thought that
sort of shows too. You don't need to have that beautiful blue, bright blue sky days. And in some ways, this would look a little more mundane relatively speaking, in those sort of conditions.
I think the atmospherics on this particular day were probably my favorite. So here's an example of a sunny day. So what was interesting about this is we got to almost 80 degrees north and actually landed, and we actually walked out onto sea ice. And
wow,
what this speaks to a little bit is there's all these complex conversations with sea ice in particular. Sea ice is very complicated how it works. So we would stand on that and we would sink down to about ankle deep, and we would be in water. And inside here, there's a water layer. And then underneath that is a rock hard layer. And underneath that is a different kind of layer again. And the knowledge of the guides in particular, and the scientists, about how to read sea ice and how and where it is or isn't safe to operate or move around on. And particularly living in a place like Svalbard, where your life depends on how well you read the ice. If you're, 100 kilometers away on a snowmobile and you read it wrong, you're gone, or you're down a hole, or you're down a crevasse, or you're stuck. And I didn't really understand until we had an hour-long lecture on just the nature of sea ice, that I was just like, oh my God, I just know nothing. And we had a beautiful experience when we were at the northernmost point, where we all went out onto an actual piece of drifting sea ice. It was pretty much heading towards the North Pole. Next stop north of here is the North Pole. And we got, we had a beautiful drink with a couple of extra shots in it. And we just stood in the middle of it, being some of the most northern people in the world. It was a beautiful experience. And this was the ice we stood on. And it was interesting just to get that cut off, kind of like cross section, I think is what I was interested in sharing, just in terms of the nature of pack ice in particular that drifts and moves around. Oh, what have I covered? So what I will actually, I'm not going to black and white, so I'll do a bit of a landscape here. So I haven't really shown a lot of the broader landscapes, and I thought just to something different, I'll show them in black and white. And yes, that was my initial shot before, but it's a nice entry point into a body of work. And I think I've got 12,500 images, and no, I haven't been through them all yet, so there's plenty more to go. And
I know the feeling.
some of my favorite areas are still yet to be touched, but I thought it'd be interesting.
I've just ordered some more hard drives for my next trip because just go through so many cards with these things.
Yeah, and shooting from the air as well, and the volume of video was really chewing it up. No complaints.
Just out of interest, Paul, how did you manage the data side of things when you were over there, given those, there's not too many places to stop off and buy a hard drive or anything there?
There's nothing photographic. I did hear a rumor there was somebody that dealt with photography a little bit in Longyearbyen, but in a town of 2,000, you don't want to turn up there depending on anything.
You don't want to be relying on that, that's for sure.
So I didn't. I had a bit of trouble with... I flew so much in Iceland that both of my drones completely shut down, and they were totally choked with volcanic sand, and to the point where they were locked. And I had to spend almost a full day, the full last day of my trip, blasting it out with compressed air. And I was in the head DJI shop with all the drone guys, trying to get it working again, and running around buying cans of compressed air. And oh my god, it was a mission.
I remember there's a bit of a theme. I remember assisting you in that regard in the past, so it's not abnormal.
Assistant extraordinaire.
Push it to the limits.
Nobody does it.
Did you take a big backup SSD or something though? Or
I think I had 3 or 4 different drives, and enough cards that I never had to empty one or delete one.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's a good strategy. Definitely. For those watching, if you can bring enough cards so you don't have to wipe any cards, then you've got to automatically have another backup method there already. So it's always a great strategy. And
also, I shot dual cards quite a lot. So I had one really big 256 card that I had as the backup card, and I shot 45 big JPEGs as another backup again. And literally, I don't think I replaced it once, because you can fit a huge volume of JPEGs on. And, in good light, without a lot of high contrast, they're quite usable, and they're still big files. As a backup anyway, it's a good peace of mind. So I made sure can't really do that with a drone. So the big issue with drones, as you well know, Licky, is you pretty much every flight, you've either got to change the card out, or you've got to immediately download what you've shot, because if the drone goes down, you've lost everything that was on there before. And nothing's a given in flying in these sort of environments. You can get scores coming in at any time.
Yeah, I used to budget a card a day for like a 10-day trip or something like that. But when you're away that long, you obviously can't take that many cards. So
yeah,
they're not expensive, but it's just too much to manage. You're more likely to lose them if you're dealing with too many.
I had 5 different countries. I did a lot of shooting. Yeah, I worked that little Mavic hard. But yeah, I thought it'd be interesting just to experience a landscape. We've had so much emphasis on color that that'd be nice to just lean into the quieter sort of atmospheric kind of structural aspects through black and white. They give a different kind of relationship to the place. And it was a lot of it was blue sky that we had, and I, as you noticed, like a lot of these were this particular early part of the series is in one of those moody days, and we didn't get so many of those, and I think that's more common than not. There's a lot of fog up there often at various times of year. It's so you're very, very likely to get a lot of moods and a lot of changes, which I personally think is fantastic, because nothing when it just stays the same carries the same diversity photographically. And so we did get to experience everything in sort of every light. But we didn't get any crazy storms, and we didn't get any crazy oceans. The sea there is very gentle, actually. There's very little sea to worry about, and it can only be a localized blow up, in which case doesn't carry a lot of open ocean swell anyway. It's more like dealing with surface chop. So It's quite different to the Antarctic and like the Drake Shake crossing the Antarctic, which is quite notorious. You really just don't have to deal with that. So it's a bit of a gentler place for an expedition, sort of a polar expedition anyway. And you know, that's nothing to complain about. So you can see here, this is actually a massive bird cliff, and you can almost see that coloration is actually, you know, bird dung. It's not snow or ice or anything. And one of the big, actually where I shot the Arctic foxes was down along here. And then it was just parading. It went from here to like there in like 5 minutes. It's so quick. But it went back and forth quite a lot. We just gently sort of let it move around, and it came back and forth on where we were, so we didn't need to follow anything. And it was just looking around. Obviously, they hunt for eggs and fallen chicks and that kind of thing. But even, you know, this was a blue sky day, but the atmospherics was still beautiful, you know, even on a blue sky day for a real classic kind of black and white. And there's a lot of people, a lot of really hardcore outdoor people that will literally sail all around these incredibly remote fjords with skis, and then they'll hike up places, and you'll just see the most random set of ski tracks in the most remote places you could possibly imagine in the world. They'll be coming down here and coming out and you're like, what the heck? And that's a big locals pastime. I mean, I imagine a lot of them locals will get around doing that with snowmobiles as well. But
it's like an amazing spot to take an IR camera as well, with all of the black ridges there and the snow, and I mean, it almost looks quite monochromatic. It would look quite monochromatic even without the conversion, I'd imagine.
Next time I think I'll do that. There is some beautiful historical components to things. There are kind of random huts around the place, and the most faraway places that they really have to build well or don't survive. I think this was actually originally set up as a bit of a place for tourism, actually, to people to stay and move around this place. It's obviously the roof's sort of having a bit of a few issues, but there's a lot of really interesting history back there. This is a big 9-image stitch too. Right on the very, very last morning, actually right next to Longyearbyen. You don't have to go more than 10 minutes out of Longyearbyen and you're in the most incredible country. And that was really brought home. And we spent the whole last day and a half in the same fjord, actually 2.5 days that Longyearbyen was in. And it was still just like no sign of human beings, you know, just incredible, remote, dramatic place. This is like I said, a 9-image stitch to give that sort of prep. You know, really incredible. Everywhere you look is these incredibly dramatic features. You know, Spitsbergen, you know, the land of the pointed mountains. It's sort of the structural
aspects of repeating sort of fishes in the mountains. Really fascinating. It's like a copy paste job. Like you really interesting
play with a lot of different compositions, as you can imagine, Ben, as well. You know, there's a shot within a shot here, or there's a square one here, or you know, and as you moved along, the angles of the light changed as well, and they changed the level of depth you get from that side lighting. And occasionally you get an immense one, just the presence of some of it, you know, like it's a powerful, raw place. But I feel like on this particular trip, we kind of experienced the gentler side of it. You know, there was a softness and a grace and an elegance to almost every day, which I think was unusual in that it was pretty much consistent through the whole 10 days. There was one time where he told us to batten down the hatches and it was going to be crazy. We knew what was going to happen. We changed the whole trip around the weather, and it just blew past us and never really happened.
I'm just interested too. I always go this way, but like, did you have like a lens that was kind of fused on the camera most of the time, or did you I'm assuming you had a couple bodies and you were sort of switching between a mid and a long zoom?
A couple of bodies a lot. 24-105 first choice. 100 to 500 was on there permanently on the second camera, and when I needed
you had that on the R5.
Yeah, on the R5, and 16 to 35 when we got close with the iceberg. So that were the three main lenses I used.
And I bet you the 16-35 was maybe 5-10%.
Probably, yeah, but maybe 5 or 8%.
Yeah, 8
close.
Was close.
Yeah, yeah, like not, yeah. Sorry, I wasn't being facetious. I was just calculating in my head because I've literally been looking at 12,000 images and I got a pretty good idea of the focal lengths I was using.
It seems to be like I think a lot of people would have a similar experience with the focal length choices.
Definitely a good place for a long lens, and you know, I worked pretty hard to get the right gear. I was lucky. Canon loaned me a really nice brand new 16-35 and also a second R5 body, which was beautiful, so I didn't have to worry about different nuances or having to switch gears and mentally between settings and that kind of thing. It was a real gift. And it made things a lot easier. And I had this as a sepia tone. I looked a lot older. I switched it back to a more of a classic black and white, so it fit in with the other ones. But I feel like, it has a real classic kind of feel, that one. And there's a huge big glacier face, well, about a 250 foot high one there. And that's looking back on where we are. And the amount of places we were, I don't know, for an entire week, we didn't see a ship or a human being or anything. I think they can change through the seasons. At the peak of the season, there might be 100 boats floating around the whole archipelago, but it's 60,000 square kilometers. So there's plenty of room to roam. But again, being a smaller boat, and also I think it was partly to do with the permitting that this particular boat runs under. They operate a little bit differently, and they have a lot more freedom. And for instance, the regular permitting that a lot of the European boats that run under in the polar regions, they're actually not allowed to fly drones at all. And it just happened to be lucky enough that this particular boat ran under a different kind of nomenclature that allowed it a lot more freedom in terms of where and when it moved and where it berthed and actually to fly drones as well, which was, and no one else was flying drones. And yes, I had to prove to an nth degree all the permits that I had. And no, I wasn't allowed to fly for the first 2 days until we were way, way, way away from Long Yemen. And and also had to be prepared that if, not the police as it were, but the inspection team came along, I'd have all those accessible and available and prove it on the spot and that kind of thing. So it was, it wasn't a lighthearted approach, and it was not a given. And it was a bit of a gamble that I could pull it off, but it was definitely the best flying experience of my life to date. It's going to take a lot to top that, I have to say. I think I just have just a few aerial shots here and there. I don't think
nice.
These yet, but just getting up in the pack ice in the north, getting really sort of far up there, and just getting a sense of it's so unique. Pack ice, the experience of it, and it actually drifted overnight and locked the boat in. And that's where I came in handy, trying up a path to get us out. But again, I personally have an experience like that. Like, ice has so many characteristics and shapes and styles. This is what you call fast ice. And this is what is physically connected with the land. And that does fall away in the summer. But this is the entry point of a lot of the polar bears who are roaming around the physical solid land to then come out onto the pack ice itself. And they can literally live on the pack ice. They don't necessarily have to be on land at all. But this is a lot of their hunting ground with it. This looks like a seal hole, actually. Where they might be laying in wait, waiting for one to come through. And seals are their main diet, relatively speaking. But it was a beautiful night, and the grandeur of what you're around. We didn't get far enough out to see anywhere that land disappeared, but it was you can see how it's starting to close in and getting thicken up, and this is what you've got to watch. So it's a bit of a gamble when you start moving around in these areas with a smaller boat. Like getting in and out can be a bit of an issue. And worth sort of keeping an eye on. Again, these are all sort of unedited, but I enjoyed playing with the 70mm on the Mavic 3 is actually 48 megapixels. So I leant pretty hard on shooting at 70mm quite a lot, and I did a lot more obliques, Lukey. Obviously, I can't get that high, so I'm not really doing any top downs. But that's a wide. I think that might be a stitch to give a wider sort of sense. This crescent was just magnificent, and we sea kayaked in and around.
That's beautiful.
Quite a lot. This is one of the huts have a lot of history and story to their own. I mean, you can see how there are places that open out a little bit more, and this would be where walruses love to hang out. These big open, sort of easy to access sort of places. I'm probably going to turn that. It's probably
that's really nice with it. Just so I was gonna mention about a mono might be a good candidate.
No, it needs to be a mono. There you go. It's like the bay of the crescent moon. And again,
next time you could convert the drone to full spectrum so you can shoot in IR from the air. There you go. That's next level.
That would be next level. I don't think we've done that. Again, this might even be at 166. I was pretty far back when I shot this. Actually,
it looks pretty compressed.
Way out to sea, very compressed. But it's so fun and new. And of course, I hadn't seen any of this done before because the drone was basically so new. I got it the very day it came out, and it wasn't even available in the shops yet. I had to pre-order one. So I didn't really have any preface to go by. There you go. There's a bigger stitch of the same sort of bay from a little bit lower down. It'll probably come out pretty well. But I did allude to kayaking, and I did luckily get to actually go out for a kayak one day. And oh my God, it was unbelievable. You couldn't really do both. I did push Toby pretty hard to see, is there a way I can somehow do both? And obviously I'm working with a fly photography client, so that's the main issue. Why not? But because they have to get all very, very specific survival equipment for individual people to fit right, you can't just sort of jump around. So there's the crane that they used a lot to get the boats on and off, particularly there's another one on the back. And so it's quite a physical thing to do to actually get the boats ready to go. So the guides work really, really hard. But goodness me, the places they could get to. I only did one shoot, and I will show you a video after this of what I shot. Basically, just in this one area here where I was roaming on the land, and they happened to be in the same area as us because we weren't always in the same place. So I actually didn't really get to photograph them a lot. But when I got in the water, I was just shaking my head. I was just going, oh God, am I even here? This is like day 8 or 9, you know. Every day was so overwhelming. I was kind of waiting for it to feel like, oh yeah, another day. And it just never felt like that. Not even close. Every day was different. Every different day had its own personality and characteristics and lighting and background and specific sort of elements and characteristics to what you saw and pops of color and different kind of wildlife experiences. It was just a gift that kept on giving every day here. And, you know, every day was an epic shooting day, and every day was an epic flying day, which is even more rare because conditions for flying are obviously a little bit more specific. And it made it really beautiful for Toby because obviously a still day is a beautiful day for sea kayaking as well. And they make the trips very accessible. You don't have to be an experienced sea kayaker to come on a trip like this. They're so well managed and they're so stable, these boats, and they're so well guided that it's really a really empowering experience. If you choose to do that. So Deb, who actually came from Tasmania, she ummed and ahed a lot because she's a photographer too. And she's like, what do I do? What do I do? And she was coming with me originally, and then she actually changed her mind and sea kayaking. And you can't really shoot a lot or that easily in a sea kayak unless you've got a very, very patient person on the back that wants to do all the paddling for you. And if you have waterproof equipment or, you know, pally case, which I have done quite a lot of myself when I've done it commercially and that kind of thing. But wonderful experience. It was particularly here, like, oh, that's massive. You'll see that.
Crazy.
Show you.
That's quite the peak.
Yeah, and this was full of thousands and thousands of seabirds all the way through, and they almost kind of filled the sky back there. You'll see in the video where a couple of them just sort of come across. He was the keenest. Every time you saw them, he was somewhere else relative to everybody else, and paddling 5 times faster. He was an absolute machine. Anthony loved it. So I got asked to do a group shot. I thought, oh yeah, got to do that. But yeah, the color, the lighting, you know, you really had to have your sunscreen on for trips like this because you got a lot of reflections on the water as well. But I was super, super lucky. I think my photo clients were just photoed out, and I got this opportunity to go once, and they actually gave me the blessing and said, you know what, we could do with a break. Why don't you just go for it? And I was like, thank you very much. So, and we also landed, of course, and we climbed up this beautiful sort of hilltop and got incredible sort of views and walked right up there. And you can see it's a different, they're all in full dry suits, and these are the spray skirts that you have that seal you into the boat, and you're kind of wandering around and you're kind of snowshoes, so to speak. So it's a different experience from a different kind of clothing and structure that you're wearing, but you can still get around and get a lot. You're still pretty warm actually. And here's, you know, the team, you know, the walking, the Zodiac landings, the boat, like it's a very, very well structured, well organized kind of thing. So I will treat you to my next never before be seen or shown video, if I can find it. That is purely of the sea kayaking, and this one is in 4K, fellas.
Woohoo!
So this is 3 minutes. So enjoy. yeah, fellas.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
What
not too shabby.
conditions?
Oh my God, now you got to look at my face again.
Yeah, beautiful.
So I've run through pretty quickly because I know we want to keep the show tight tonight. So we've still got 10 minutes left. So I'm quite aware that I was presenting at you quite a lot, and I didn't leave a huge amount of room for questions because I wanted to make sure we're on time. So ask away, gents, if there's anything in particular you want to reflect on or ask about.
I'm just checking to see. I think someone mentioned that looks like the trip to the Raptor Refuge paid off. Loving the wildlife shots, and a few comments coming through. Good look at
Scotty.
icebergs all night long. Loving all the ice images. Yes, great drone shots. Made me wonder why I don't want one. There you go. That's a pretty good compliment if someone's looking to pick one up because of seeing those shots. And,
Yeah,
certainly
it's definitely tempting me to go grab a drone. I can't afford it right now, but man, it'd be nice. Especially, I love that compressed cinematic sort of look that you got with those longer focal lengths. It was really gorgeous for some of the sort of comparisons for like small boat, big mountain. Which if you want to get that sort of shot with the wider lens, it just doesn't work. So
just to show the scale as well, Ben, like being able to show the big vessel in the surrounding landscape, it's just really not possible to do without having that aerial perspective. So, and I guess what you can't really see would be how much, like Paul indicated about him trying to track down the drone and purchase it. I think it would have only just been released, but then also on top of that, the permissions and all of the permits, and then you finally get it up there and can fly it, and then all of the conditions, and looked like there was some birds getting pretty close there too, and a few probably heart in the mouth moments as well.
That was just that one moment, and they hadn't been around that time. I was just a few coming home, and I landed straight away when I saw that. But it was. It's I wouldn't suggest that anybody's going to consider they're going to be getting a drone and going up there and flying, because the chances are very, very small. There's a whole train. One, you got to have the skill to do it. Two, you've got to have the licensing, the permitting, the exams, the skill, the permission from the captain, and the weather. And so there's so many sort of things in a row that have got to line up. And it was pretty touch and go through that whole way to pull it off. And I really had to work hard, and I had to be prepared to not fly at all. When it came down to it, the reality of it, like literally, I was there with all the permits ready to go the day before, and Toby's like, the captain's not sure he's going to let you fly at all, even though you've got it on. I was just like, oh man,
You wouldn't have been too happy about that.
Well, I was prepared enough to know, and I learned enough Norwegian over sitting in hotel rooms, sitting all these exams to get all the right permits. It was pretty fiddly, and I again, hats off to Tim. I couldn't have done it without him. It's quite likely that drone wouldn't have made it. Landing on a moving boat of that size, they're not waiting for you. The boat's doing its own thing. So I had to be very, I have really, really good communication with the movement of the boat in particular. And, and I had to have somebody with me most of the time. Well, I chose to have someone with me most of the time to take the pressure off the landings in particular. So I got a little bit lucky. I probably would have done less flying, and certainly in situations where the boat was moving and I didn't know where it was going to be moving to. It's one thing to land on a boat that's moving straight. It's another when it's actually curving and going different directions at the same time. And you've got wires and radar and rails just everywhere. And obviously, I did most of my flying when people were asleep because there's no people around. And so I didn't have to worry about the safety issue of landing anywhere near people. So with really good communication and good teamwork and a lot of respect and a lot of research and a lot of work, I managed to pull it off.
Yeah, and also the other side to that too is if you were to go back and you were to have some permission, and even if you had all the clearances you like, with a place like that, there's no guarantee you'd be able to fly at all. So you really, I think, it's the make hay while the sun shines, and really that's playing to the strengths of the conditions and getting the footage while you could. I've certainly heard of people being able to have permission to fly down in Antarctica on an entire trip and not being able to have the weather available to actually set the drone off either. So I think that's also a big consideration with this sort of thing. It's very small sort of chances for these things, and so kudos to making that happen, because that's not an easy thing to do.
No, I lost a bit of hair over that one, but oh my God, it was worth it.
How did the Mavic handle with the landing side of things? Because sometimes it has like a if the vessel's moved after you've taken it off, it doesn't like coming.
I can only land in specific places. There's one particular spot which seemed like the best place to land, and it was this one square compartmentalized area, but it had a big beam behind it and a big block in front of it, and I had to sort of come in at a diagonal and try and land. And what happened is it moved into a different mode, because you can't lock away all the sensors like you can on the Mavic 2, and so you can't strip them all away. And what happened was it wouldn't allow, and basically it slowed the drone down to a certain speed, which meant most of the time it wasn't as fast as the boat. And as soon as it went to that mode, it started going backwards, and it was going backwards straight into a massive beam, and it was just, so the window was so narrow. So yeah, it wasn't for the faint-hearted, and it did add a lot of pressure to the trip, and it meant basically I didn't sleep, because the best time to fly is while everyone else was asleep. And that, of course, meant I wasn't sleeping either.
That's probably not much different to normal then, by the sounds.
Yeah, but I knew enough to know that every day was a gift, and who knows?
Yeah, you've got to make the most of it.
Who knows what will happen again? So, what I will do to finish off the show is actually speak to the fact that I'm going back, and I'm heading back on a beautiful trip with Toby and some of the same ELs, and hopefully Tim Cope as well. He's a total legend. And Devon, hopefully as well, one of the Canadian guides, and Gary Miller's already booked in, who's probably the best Arctic polar region guide that I know of, and a wonderful, beautiful, humble, accessible guy. And we're going June 7th to 17th. And I just literally spoke to Toby now before the show, and he's given me a bit of a, if somebody wants to DM me, I can give them quite a special pre-season early deal that is going to save you quite a bit. So if you are interested, feel free to reach out to me directly, either paulhoelen@gmail.com or Instagram or Facebook. Just direct message me, and we can have a good conversation about it. Or I can even put you directly in touch with Toby. And it is, it's the fastest changing place in the world. It's an incredibly unique place. It's really impacted me in ways I just didn't expect, Lukey. I knew, I went to Iceland thinking it was going to be the one that got me, and it was actually the Arctic that touched me way, way, way deeper. And even though I spent 20 years dreaming of going to Iceland, it was here that just got me. And I'm still coming to terms with the depth of it. And speaking to a lot of people who were on that particular trip, we had one of those magic trips where everybody got on like a house on fire, and that made it just, it sort of lifted the whole experience to a whole nother level again. And that's not always a given. And in this case, we got the cream on top. And our particular team was one of the best, like the EL. And I actually went back to Norway with him and spent some time privately. And he said it was one of the best teams he'd ever put together. And he'd been trying to get those specific guides and people together for years. And it was the first time we'd done it. So there was a lot of dominoes that fell together beautifully on our particular trip. There's also going to be another trip in August from the 4th to 17th, where we get a bit of a taste of everything, where we start in Svalbard, and then we, for 3 or 4 days, and then we cross the Greenland Sea, which is only 2 days, and we do another whole week in Greenland as well. So I'm lining that one up, and I haven't been to Greenland yet, and my sense of people is it's a lovely stepping stone to go from Svalbard to Greenland to the Antarctic in terms of the scale of things. Even though they all have the different personalities, like Greenland doesn't really have wildlife, for instance. It's very much a landscape place. And Svalbard has some of the best access to polar wildlife in the world.
But don't forget Roger Fishman's drone stuff from around Greenland. I'm sure you recall some of the narwhals things and all of those other shots that he got. So
he flew circumnavigated twice in a helicopter, and he's the only person I know in the world who was flying a drone from inside a helicopter at the same time. To do the one-way drone shot and then land to then pick up the drone. Like, oh my God.
Well, I was just going to ask you, if you had to select like one, 3-4 hour period of shooting during the entire, Svalbard experience, what would you pick as like the number one?
Oh, I think for the mood and the drama, that really early, where I shot the bulk of the ice shots that I showed you in that series. I think something about that was just, it was so otherworldly and so unexpected and so dramatic and so moody. It just really just blew my socks off. I was like, I'm just on another planet is how I felt. There's one photograph in particular that I feel sums up the trip really beautifully. And funny enough, I haven't shown it yet. I just found it just then. And sort of this is it here. Like this is my office for 10 days.
Yeah, great.
Like this pretty much sums up every day, like plenty of space, like super.
It's incredible. Like having that much space in the Zodiac. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Like, and that was a smaller trip. You know, we had 43 instead of 50, so we had a little bit of extra room, and you know, I think the most we had on a boat was 6 or 7, and so that gave us a huge amount of breathing. I mean, you can work with 10 easily, but it's extra nice to have that breathing room. And you know, unlike Luke, you probably had to deal with, we didn't have to deal with a lot of water or chop or swell, so it was pretty easy to manage the gear and keep it in good shape. I certainly was prepared for all that, and I spent a lot of time working with Luke and Toby and other guides and purchasing different things to make sure my equipment was going to be well looked after, particularly Andrew's lens, Pepsi, and Canon's R5 and the 1635. But to me, this sums up the experience really beautifully. Like, if there's a single image that speaks to the wonder, the drama, the interest, the intimacy, the freedom, this one really does it really beautifully in terms of what particularly a photographic based expedition like I was running was like. And
one that really spoke to me, Paul, was probably the seal backbone one, and the composition you had there, and the sense of primevalness, or I guess, or if that's a word. But that one was I thought that was quite poignant.
Well, it's just a couple of others I just realized I hadn't shown. There's only 4 or 5. So just in terms of the human history, there are a lot of areas where it's really quite present, really isolated areas. There was one area up there in a particular fjord where they literally had 200 people living full time, basically whaling, and a lot of this is left over from the whaling days. You can literally see center of whale vertebrae there, and you know, it looks like they're trying to use it.
Have they used that as the rudder? Have they?
It sort of looks like that, doesn't it? I mean, they had to be pretty innovative up there because the resources are just zero. And then there's, you know, the reference to just bones, you know, like there's a sadness to that as well, because obviously, like most places, they hunted a lot of things largely to extinction or close to it. So us good old human beings. But yeah, very, very special, once in a lifetime experience for me, and now I'm hoping it's going to be more than a once in a lifetime.
Yeah, well, I mean, in line with that, Paul, I was just wondering what like maybe my final question would be, what would you do different next time, and is there anything you'd like to try that you didn't try this time?
I really don't feel like I need to. What I feel like will be different is I'll be a lot more considered from a visual point of view. Like I've gone through that, oh my God, every moment is blowing my socks off, and literally trying to fly at the same time, you know, as guide clients professionally. That's a lot on your plate at the same time. So what I'm guessing is, and particularly, you know, I've done 2 sort of big 3-hour sessions with one of my clients, putting an incredible book together of abstracts of this particular journey. And she actually showed me what I probably missed. She slowed down. She went super intimate. She was super considered and thoughtful about every image. And she really reached underneath the surface and beyond the obvious. And I feel like I started to do that, but she'd done it in a way that she had that space that I was filling up with other things. And
well, I mean, that's she should have the space, because you're creating that space for her by helping her out. So in some ways, that's the way it should be.
Well,
so
she also took it to herself. So when we weren't doing an expedition, she was out into the wee hours, sometimes for 2 hours on her own, or she was up before everybody else out there before breakfast. And she gifted herself a lot of times where she literally had the whole edge of the boat to herself as well.
It's a big learning, isn't it? Like the amount of deck time you can just, you know, the more you're out there, the more you see, the more chance you've got to capture something special, and you can really make those chances yourself by putting the time into it. And if you're only out there once, or you don't know when you're going to be back there, you might as well be putting as much into it as you can.
I think outside of that, Lukey, the environment and experience is going to take care of that for me. There is no formulaic experience up there. There is very little to no repetition of anything. And, you know, the variety of light, you know, the different shapes, the sea ice just moves dramatically by hour, and completely changed where you go on a trip and where you can go. The wildlife is utterly unpredictable, even by experts, in terms of what you're going to encounter and when and how. So I don't think, you know, you kind of need to, like, it'll do it for you, like every experience. And you've done 3 now in Antarctica, and I'm, without even asking you, I can guarantee they're all quite different experiences, visually and aesthetically and otherwise.
That's why I was sort of saying too that if you went back there, don't you probably know already not to expect the same conditions, but that's the conditions themselves can dictate very much what you shoot or the experience you have as well. So, you know, it might feel like a completely different place next time just from the conditions I'd expect.
I think particularly with the Polar Pioneer and the permitting that it has and the flexibility that it has, we're never going to be going to the same places. Whereas a lot of the ships in Antarctica, they have a fixed route, and they've got.
No, it's very much the similar. I mean, they've got a fixed zone that they can operate, but you're still very much dictated by the conditions as well. It's just that you have to book them in with the IATO regulations, but that there is you know, a level of flexibility there.
Yeah, and I think way more so from my understanding up here. It's a little bit unique with this particular craft and the particular sort of licensing and permitting they have. So it's kind of the best of all worlds. And Toby, you know, from Southern Sea Ventures, he put a huge amount of time and thought into what he feels like offers the most intimate and flexible and diverse sort of experience that he can. And you know, I haven't had the experience on the big ships that you have, Lukey, to compare, but given all the time I spent dreaming about it and thinking about it, get yourself up there, Ben. You got to pop the cherry. You've flown over it, but it's quite a different experience getting blasted in the Zodiac and, you know, literally reaching out and touching and having these creatures almost breathe on you. It's otherworldly. It's utterly.
Yeah, I'd absolutely love to. So if anyone wants to bring me on as a workshop host, I'd gladly say yes. Or if they want to, you know, donate a few grand, then I'll be right on it.
Yeah, this Svalbard trip, it's actually one of the more affordable polar region trips that I've seen, actually, relative to how they can get. And the photographic component that we've worked out is it's an optional extra, but it's only like $750 or something to have. Me for 10 days. That's a bargain, folks.
Oh, what a nightmare. No, it's actually a bargain.
I just had 10 days together, so he could probably say that for real.
No, it's like the thing that with that I always think is, you know, if you're going to all that effort and expense to get there, then just that little bit extra to almost, you know, guarantee getting the shots of a lifetime is a pretty like a bit of a no-brainer in a lot of ways. So yeah, definitely can see huge value in that. And
I think
yeah,
the trilogy of places. So if you had the money and the time, and I literally tried to do all of the above, like the Lofoten, the Faroe Islands, and Iceland are all within quite an accessible loop of each other on a trip like that. So I tied in Iceland specifically, and I was looking at doing the Faroes as well. But I mean, to be perfectly honest, they're some of the most expensive places in the world to just holiday in. And being the experienced traveler I was, I did it on a shoestring as good as I could. But it is well worth doing, and I'm very conscious and I'm quite aware some people might come up with me with comments about the carbon footprint of running these sort of things, and it is a relevant conversation. But I made the most of it. I did 5 countries. I went and visited my old Dutch family, and I went to the Arabian desert on the way, which was a dream. I did Iceland as well. I did Norway as well. So I really tied it in and tried to maximize every second that I was up there. And I was super, super productive and did a lot of research. And I would like to do a show if the boys will let me on the contrast between the Arctic desert.
No. Of course.
And I think that would be because they're just two different worlds, two completely different worlds. And I'd
love to see some of your desert stuff as well. Did you get the drone up in the dunes?
I did. I absolutely did.
Yeah, that'd be a great place for some aerials that compress sort of perspectives. That'd be awesome. So yeah, future show for sure. In the books there.
That'll be a fire and ice trip. That one. Might call it fire and ice. There you go.
Yeah.
Why not? Oh well, we might need to wrap it up there, Paulos. But
mate. I was on time, brother. On time.
Yeah, no, that's all right. So it's it's been amazing to hear from you, Paul, and I think we've got a pre-record coming up pretty soon as well, hopefully to for the next show, which is extremely exciting. And so we just want to thank you all, and thank you very much to Paul for putting that presentation together for us. I'm sure that took quite a period of time to gather it all together, given the size of your archives there.
Yeah,
and beautiful editing. I didn't ask actually if you edited those videos as well. That was beautifully done.
I did it all myself. Yeah, I got a little bit of hand from Tim on the first one in terms of just quickly putting it together, because I literally did that live on the boat in a big hurry, and I did all the kayaking one myself just recently, partly for Toby. And again, look out for the release of the article this weekend. So the Saturday Age and Sydney Morning Herald should have the cover and the whole beautiful article, and Craig's writing is incredible. So I'm really looking forward to that.
And give us some insight into what the cover might be, Paul? Or
no, I don't know. They're not telling me. I've been working with an amazing photo editor, Louisa Kirby, who's I've known for about 15 years, and she's a total legend. and there's quite a few different people involved in that conversation, and it's quite last minute, I think, what ultimately gets chosen. So yeah, excited to see that come out, and also for Toby as well to support his business. And you know, it's pretty gutsy to buy a business like this in the middle of COVID and hope like hell the world's going to open up and you can make a living out of it and not fall.
Especially on cruise ships as well.
Yeah. So, and again, you know, if you've got any questions about the place or you're interested in coming out with me, again, I got special permission to give you a pretty good early season deal, which won't last too long. But so, and I had to nudge Toby about it, but he's given me the green light. So feel free at the very least to just learn more about the place. It's unbelievable, and we'll see if you can get up there, Ben. Up or down?
Yeah, one day.
Do it.
Again,
We need to do a
take...
TLP tour where we're all we do some live shows from on board or something.
We might need to start incorporating a few more ads to get the budget.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's not get too carried away, but yes, sounds like
really quickly,
sounds like fun.
Every boat, as Luke knows well, has really high-end experts at wildlife and ecology. And
the people are incredible. Yeah, unbelievable.
And they run shows all the time. You just learn so much about a place. You know, I had to go back through. I wrote notes and notes and notes that I just started reading back into it, going, oh my goodness, I learned a huge amount about ecology and wildlife and ecosystems and climate change. It's a very educational experience as well as experiential one. It's so many things.
Cool. Well, we'll see you. Thanks again, Paul, and we'll see you all again. And yeah, we can't wait to chat until next time. Catch you later, everyone. Good night.
All right, thanks for letting me voice this one out, boys. I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
As have we, and it hasn't disappointed one bit. So there you go.
Right on.
Catch you later.
See ya.